So being self-aware, but also being aware of the team around you, the construct of the team, the dynamics of that team, what their strengths and weaknesses are. Because increasingly it's with teams that we succeed or we fail.
Yes.
I mean,
Yes.
You're succeeding because you've got a great production team with you. You
Yes.
also, there are multiple people,
True.
it takes a village to bring up a baby,
True.
right? So it's like that. I think leadership too requires a whole ecosystem around the leader that allows the leader to succeed.
It's a lovely, no, I'm going to start again. They couldn't even come with a better name.
Which school did you study in?
Clooney Convent.
So, which school?
Clooney Convent. That is where हमारा हिंदी बहुत ही निपुण है started.
Oh yeah.
The law, entomology.
Ethology.
I will never get this right. Will you edit this?
No.
I've also been called 11 steps planning for everything.
Who called you that?
I've been a big fan of yours for, I think, from when you started.
Really, I was terrible. You can't be my fan.
I'll throw a question back at you, Sajid.
Oh, yo.
He had such a thick Malayali accent that even the Malayalis didn't know what he was talking about.
ये थोड़ा और बेहतर हो सकता था. You know to yourself.
Better is what?
I shouldn't venture into controversial areas.
No, get it.
No.
They call me Gawar.
I'd like to come back to this podcast when we made it.
Because I'm coming from a rural background, only thing I know, I can hold a pencil.
That was hard. Again, I cried like a baby after my first divorce.
In between, Met Gala happened, Cannes happened, and this is where I am. I felt that there was too much noise, I call it, in the world. There was a lot of noise,
I'm not trying to fit into your world. I'm trying to create a world of my own.
So how would you define who am I?
Hi, welcome back to another episode of Attitude Makeover. When we're growing up, often we're asked this question of what do you want to be when you grow up? And as adults, when we get into the treacherous adulthood, again we're asked this question of what do you want to aspire to be? And oftentimes I've seen us answering this with I want to be a CEO, whether it's a CEO of your own brand, your idea converting into a startup, or a company or organization you're in. Nonetheless, that aspiration of becoming a CEO is not a small one. We see a lot of content out there on CEOs speaking about what it takes to become a CEO. But the journey of transformation to become a CEO is something else. It requires you to understand what's the motive behind that aspiration of becoming a CEO. What are some of the pitfalls? What are some of the skills that are required? Is it hereditary? Can it be coached? Can someone be taught on how to become a CEO? What are some of the salient things and risks associated with this journey? This and a lot more, whether it's about servant leadership and the topic of servant leadership and how it's understood and what's the real meaning of servant leadership. How do you come out of a legacy of old you to create a new you so that it doesn't haunt you in the process of transformation? All of this is what we talk today. My guest has started as an engineer to now become the CEO of HSBC's Software Development Center in India. None other than Pradeep Menon. And it's going to be an interesting conversation to understand through his journey on how you can actually build these nuances of honing yourself towards becoming a CEO. Pradeep, welcome on board. Thank you so much
for having me over.
It's such a pleasure, honor, and delight.
Thank you so much. And I know we have not met during the pandemic, so it's good to catch up with you.
Yes.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much. And for my audience, we've worked together in the past in GE, and I've seen Pradeep grow, and I've worked with him to really understand his style of leadership. And I thought this would be a very insightful conversation, just walking through your journey and deconstructing the needs of the skills that are required to become a CEO. So I often start my conversation, Pradeep, with my audience really trying to understand who my guest is. And the idea is not to sort of garnish it with titles and all that stuff, but if I strip off all of that to just the basic Pradeep Menon, at the core of it, who is Pradeep Menon? What is your values? What is your character and personality that you stand up for?
Oh, wow. Yeah, I mean, I think if you strip everything away, deep down I'm a very boring average Joe, right? I'd probably not get too far. But I think sometimes, and I was just thinking as you're asking me that, it boils down to, where we grew up, growing up with our friends, and I'd like to, and I think for our friends, we are who we are when we started off with them, right? They don't recognize us for who we become because they're still those close buddies we work with. I think if I were to look at me from their lens, they'd probably see me as a dependable friend. I mean, a good guy to have around. They'll probably call me, I'm around. So I think deep down, probably that's what I am. I should ask them to figure out if they share that opinion, but I guess that's probably what it is. Yeah, but just an average dependable friend.
So how was early years for you? Did you grow up in Bangalore or how?
Yeah, no, I grew up in Mumbai.
Okay.
I spent all my life in my initial growing years. I admit that, probably though I used to think I was very inclusive, I think all my friends were probably from the same suburb of Bombay that I grew up in. I don't think we all spoke the same dialect, probably the same way of speaking Hindi. And it's only later on as I started working and I started doing my post-graduation that I actually realized, started mixing with people from other parts of India even. But otherwise, yeah, I mean, I grew up like a frog in the well, pretty much between the northernmost part of India being Thane and the southernmost part of India being Nariman Point, and my life probably revolved in those 30 odd kilometers, 30, 40 kilometers.
So this was early years all the way till engineering.
Yeah, I'm finished. I think it's only when, we started working, you started moving around, and then of course, life started coming in. As you said, I started off as a production engineer. That was my first job.
Where was it?
That was in Mumbai.
Okay.
In the late 90s, and I think started off there. Data engineering became a lot cooler, a lot longer, but back then it was just the average engineer, right?
Yeah.
So came up that path, moved on, and after a while I just realized that I like technology, but bringing in the management aspects actually helped me even more with what I was trying to do.
Yeah.
And then there was a path that carved out, and I've gone along.
So after 30 or like 20 years of growing up in Mumbai, leaving your hometown and really going worldwide, did that change you as a person?
It taught me as a person. And I think with that teaching comes change, right? I think it's when you start, you grow up in a very comfortable environment, and suddenly when you are exposed to things which you haven't been before, you become vulnerable. You haven't seen those things before, right? And then many a times you're alone, so you adapt. And I think that is good because it makes you resilient. You figure out, and I keep telling this to people, sometimes the three most romantic words in the world is figuring it out, right? So that's good. So that's something that sets in when you start traveling, when you start doing different jobs, when you're exposed to different situations.
Yeah.
It does grow you as a person.
Yeah.
That I do.
What was the toughest figuring out that you've gone through?
Well, I can't say it's the toughest. I keep having these existential questions on probably every other week saying, it'd be tough for me, but I think at probably about 10 years into my career, trying to figure out, what the next 20 years, you can't predict anything, right? It's very difficult to predict a year, leave alone a decade out. But to be frank, just getting a sense of, what is it that you want to be. I think that was and trying to make some calls, because you've got to make some early calls to start heading in that direction. I think those were some of the more relatively difficult decisions to make, is what I probably think. I don't know what, it's a never say never, right? I don't know what's in store for the coming years. So, but some of them were not the easiest of decisions.
And in this process, have you also been figuring out your patterns of your journey as well as the support system that you've been building? Is there a consistent pattern to that, or has that been
There isn't a consistent pattern. To be honest, I think you start heading in the right direction, and then you make course corrections. Now, of course, there is always a tailwind or a headwind, and sometimes that blows you off course. But as far as you know that that's your North Star, and you start moving one step at a time, and you're also resilient enough to figure out that if it doesn't happen at the time that you want, you don't feel, you don't take a foot off the pedal. You just start navigating around it, and as I said, figuring it out, right? You go figure out how you want to get there, and be wiser for the experience. I think sometimes things work, many a times things don't work out, right? But that doesn't mean you give up, right? So I think over a period of time it worked out, is what I'd say.
But do you start off with this North Star of, in the next 2 years, I want to do this, and so here's my micro steps that I'm leading towards that, or how has it been with you?
Well, different people have different styles. I admit that I don't think I had I plan out, like consciously I haven't done. Right? I think I've taken one thing that has held me in good stead, I must say, is I've taken things that have come my way. Right? There is always a little bit of an anxiety when you try to take slightly different orbital things, but I haven't let that impact me as much. Whether it be moving cities, I've generally never been too attached to a city or to a place. I mean, what I mean by that is, I've gone where my career has taken me. I've gone whichever role my career has held out to me, whatever the organization wants, and I think that generally works. Trying to do what the org wants and ensuring that you're able to deliver. I think that's generally a good recipe. Again, pros and cons of it, but
it also requires you to think through, and I think we'll go into this deeper as we thread through the topic, but it also requires you to sort of cushion yourself when you're trying to figure out, right? Let's say you've taken a new role, a completely new role, or like for me, for example, I've come from the tech space to a creative space.
And kudos for that. Right?
Oh.
Not too many people make that jump.
Thank you. So I think it's lead by example, I guess. So, but as you go through that, it's also about you've taken that huge plunge. But at the same time, it's also figuring out in this process and ensuring you don't hurt yourself so badly that there's no turning back. But at the same time, you're taking these baby steps and you're moving forward and you see that. So that's what I mean by cushioning.
So I think it's a very valid point, to be fair. And I've had conversations with a lot of leaders, and that's when that change comes with a bit of anxiety when you try to make sometimes an orbital shift compared to what you were doing. And in your case, for instance, you would have taken some amount of thought before you decided to do something completely different, right? And here you are, fairly successful in doing what you're doing. And I think those things are there, but I think there's to your point, I do think that one has to accept that when you get in. I think it's the mental makeup that you need to say that, you know what, you're going to try it. How wrong can it go? I mean, if it goes very wrong, you should have a plan B to fall back on. But for want of trying, why not do it? Right? I mean, you don't want to give it up just because you didn't try it, right? So I think, and also expecting that everything will work out is also probably a fallacy. I don't think, I mean, sometimes if someone's lucky or if just things align, these things happen, but seldom does that, right? I mean, you just need to be practical about it, saying that why don't you take it on? You might win some, you lose some, and then just keep moving a step ahead. And I think that generally works. Where it hurts people, the cushioning, as you're saying, is if expectations are not in line with some of the risks that you're taking. I keep saying this, that every choice we make chooses a consequence. So the day we made that choice, we also chose the consequence of that choice. I think as far as we come to terms with, the realities of the choice that we make and what it plays out, I think why not?
I think the first thing that when I was doing the research that I noticed is you need to understand the motive behind why you want to become a CEO. What I've seen is sometimes it is power, money, some of these social or the cultural aspirations that are pushed onto you. And if you step back, all of us are heroes at our own homes. And so we're trying to do some kind of a validation or setting expectations for ourselves and in our ecosystem. That's one way of looking at what motives are driving you towards that. The other is more, purposeful, a little more, about I want to become a leader, so thereby I want to create an impact for a larger community, and there's a different kind of mindset that comes in. What's your take on, what kind of motives lead to leadership? And
I think you hit the nail on the head. I think deep down as human beings, and especially in the fields that we work in, there's this need for validation. And I think that drives a lot of people. Now, of course, I don't think typically people aspire, well, they aspire to do leadership roles a little into their career. I mean, on the first day in the job, it still takes us a few years to figure out what we are doing, what we stand for, what is it that we actually want to do. Sometimes the first job that you do might not be what you would be doing 10 years later. And sometimes it is, for the lucky ones it is, but seldom is that the case. It takes you a little time, right? I think it's only after about, like I was saying, once you spend about a decade working, then you start thinking, what I'd like to aspire to, what I'd like to do or be known for is probably in this space. And that's when people start coming to terms with, now not everybody wants to be a leader. To your point, I know a lot of senior colleagues around the world who would probably be distinguished engineers.
Yeah.
Right? They'd like to go that path. And I think that is the right path. Or being an extremely talented architect would like to probably build on that space as compared to anything else. So I think that's absolutely the freedom the modern corporate life allows us to make those choices. It allows us to come to terms with that. Specifically though, going back to again, that position is, I think around that time when people start deciding, saying that, might be the path that I choose is the leadership path, then there could be a sense of validation that drives them. Also a sense, many a times, I would say, there's also a sense of purpose. Because after you work for a certain period of time, you also want to be very clear about why you're doing that, right? What is it that what does it mean for the larger ecosystem? What does it mean for you? How are you contributing to the ecosystem? That also drives some of those behaviors, right? Because I think you want to be in those positions where you can influence some of it, and some of it just comes with time.
So are there...
Deep question though.
Yeah.
It's not an easy one to answer.
Are there pitfalls in this, Pradeep? So let's say I'm pursuing this because, especially in India, one of the things I've seen is power is a big thing. Like a title and a power, I'm leading an organization of 200 people reporting to me. All of that, while at work we know the reality of it, what it takes to actually take on some responsibilities like that. But when you go to your social network, it's a big deal. It's talked about, oh, my son is doing this and things like that, right? So is there a pitfall to this? If you don't have your bigger reason for it aligned with these kind of purposes, but you're pursuing money and a title, is there a pitfall to it, or are there things that you need to be careful about in this process?
There are pitfalls, there are risks associated with, and again, that has got nothing to do with leadership. There are risks associated with probably any path that you take. Like I said, as far as we are aware of what you're getting into eyes wide open, I think it is safe. I think, yes, with aspiring to be a leader, sometimes getting there, sometimes it takes time, sometimes you take it, but you really don't, after you've become a leader, you realize, is that really what I wanted to do, right? So I know a lot of people who have had some of these soul-searching moments, right?
Yeah.
So that's what I would call the associated pitfalls. Sometimes it can lead to, some people, depending upon personalities, depending upon how people approach matters, there can be burnout.
Yeah.
There can be risks associated with sometimes things not going out, things generally going a little south in some of these leadership positions and that getting highlighted. So you've got to be very practical about it. You've got to understand that if you're getting into it, you should be. The interesting thing is about the pitfalls, but also have mitigating mechanisms to ensure that you remain calm.
Yeah.
Right? Things will go. Murphy's law is always around. Things will go wrong.
Yeah.
Right? There's always going to be things going wrong. As far as you build up your own internal peace or balance mechanisms to ensure that you know how to confront it, you know how to lead your way or navigate your organization through it, I think you should be fine.
Yeah.
But the fear of the pitfall should not get in the way of the aspiration that one wants to.
Yeah.
I think it can't go that wrong.
Yeah.
Right? Frankly, end of the day, you've got to have backup mechanisms. You probably do.
What you're also saying there is you need to be very self-aware of yourself in this process, isn't? Because only then do you know how you deal with some of these situational things, because you can't anticipate everything. There are things in your control, there are things not in your control. But when it happens, being very self-aware of how you deal with this and constantly working on that is very important.
Very true, because I think, just to use the example that you were speaking about, right, about things going wrong. When things go wrong or things go south, you need to have a certain situational awareness of what happened, which means, what led to it, how do we move out of it, what do we do for the here and now, what do we do so that we ensure that the fixes happen, it doesn't happen again. But along with situational awareness, to your point, I think self-awareness is equally key. To be not everybody. Some people, like as a leader, you'll always have some blind sides. You'll always have some positive sides. You should be aware of where you work well, where you really probably need to rely on your teams, because your teams might bring in that, it will be that X factor that they bring to the situation, which you as an individual, as a leader probably will be aware, but as an individual you might not be.
True.
So I think that is kind of key. So being self-aware, but also being aware of the team around you, the construct of the team, the dynamics of that team, what their strengths and weaknesses are. Because increasingly it's with teams that we succeed or we fail.
Yes.
I mean,
Yes.
you're succeeding because you've got a great production team with you. You
Yes.
also, multiple people,
True.
it takes a village to bring up a baby,
True.
right? So it's like that. I think leadership too requires a whole ecosystem around the leader that allows the leader to succeed.
Yeah. The evolution of that leader, the role of a leader has changed. From earlier, it used to be a persona, a personality leader, like if you take Nelson Mandela or Gandhi and the others, to today it's very transformational leader, but it's gone one notch higher to a collaborative leader, because you're no longer about just one company, it's about how do you build an ecosystem of companies to cater to a larger impact. Where are you seeing that in the next few years? Where is that leadership stretching towards?
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting comment, Sajjan. And I do think that you're right, leadership styles will evolve as time goes by, right? I mean, one of the things that we see a lot more today is the aspects of servant leadership. You spoke about that at the start, or also what I would call the invisible leadership styles, right? Where you don't have a very present and someone who's just facing you all the time, but there are leaders who will ensure that the culture in the organization is set, that you have the right mechanisms and processes set down so that everybody can succeed. They're there. The leadership creates a brand and an ecosystem such that if failure is tolerated, and that you can catch them if things go wrong, right? I think that style is taking a lot more, right? And also servant leadership as a style, which is instead of dictating things down, it's more about ensuring that you hire the right people, you ensure that you create an ecosystem where they can succeed, and you get out of their path, right? You don't stand in their path because you've got great people in who know what they're doing, right? And they just ensure that they are enabled to go do that. And I think that's key. It's also about ensuring that you serve, the word coming from, which is more about taking care of their well-being, ensuring that people are well taken care of, and then it's not about a top-down style. One needs to balance that. There's got to be some moderation in it, of course, which means that you don't want to tilt too much, because end of the day there's an outcome that has to be delivered, right? A customer outcome, a business outcome, a financial outcome. So you got to, or an employee engagement outcome at times, right? So I think it's important to keep it balanced, but increasingly that style, where it's not about a person or about a persona, but more about the team and how you ensure that you create those that environment or that culture where the team can succeed is very key. And I think the leader's role is kind of metamorphosing
into that.
Right? I think that's more visible as time goes by, and also increasingly with the world of digital. I think there are all kinds of things which impact you, right? Your business model can be impacted by multiple players around the world, right? So I think it's important that that you tend to be resilient, that you prepare for the worst. I mean, expect the best, prepare for the worst, so that and ensure that you have end of the day, it all boils down to the people who you work with, right? And you ensure that the people who you work with, just ensure that you're well taken care of, that you're very honest with them, you're as genuine with them as you can. I think generally it works, and I think those things mitigate some of the other risks that we spoke about earlier.
True. One thing I noticed about servant leadership, first thing is I think the whole definition of servant leadership and the understanding of it is very, very depending on who you talk to. But I think I completely agree with you on how the true servant leadership is nurtured around. But there are challenges with that as well, right? Because you're so used to the old school, which is the authoritative style of leadership, or a partial influence, but I'm going to stand a ground on certain things and go forward with that. Whereas servant leadership is a little different. It also requires you to have the ability to influence even when you have ideology clashes. When you have a different style of working. It requires you to be a little bit vulnerable as a leader, onboarding people together, and at the same time, when we agree to disagree, how do you take that forward?
Oh, that's a necessary survival skill.
Right?
A leader spends a lot. If life would have been so much easier if everything worked the way we wanted it to, right? But it seldom would. And I think, and you hit the nail on the head, right? I think there's always some clash. I would say it's never between individuals. It's always between two styles, or what two outcomes. Probably the different paths to the same outcome. Invariably, the outcomes tend to be very similar, but there can be different paths to taking it. Right? And I think one needs to be very mature about it. Be very practical, saying that there are multiple ways to do it. Know when to intervene, know when to just let it be. You also don't want to start prescribing too much, because then innovation in the organization or the culture of speak up stops. Right?
Yeah.
So those are very important cultural tenets. You've got to ensure that people hold a mirror to things. If they're going wrong, they should be able to speak up. We know enough instances of where things go really bad if people don't speak up. Right? So I think clash of ideologies is something that one just needs to be very calm about. One needs to accept. One needs to work through it. There's no magic wishing wand solutions to these things. I mean, different styles with different people. So I think the more that we as leaders actually spend time thinking through these things.
Now, if I go back to anybody in my audience who's like a 30, 35-year-old who's on this journey of, how do I start building these for myself? It starts with awareness, right? Where do I start? What is the advice you would give for someone who wants to really practice the art of servant leadership and figuring out and, dealing with some of these? Because it's very easy to say, "Arey, usse to mana nahi," and move on, or have this thing of, "This is not working out, let me figure out something else." But dealing with this, what's the advice for how do you go about building this as a, process for yourself?
I think you've got to just expose yourself to it and first come to terms with it. Think about it in your mind. Think, what is the learning? What is your appetite to be wrong? Like, how long can you be resilient? How long can you persevere to get what you want? I think that's the step number one. The other thing that I would tell anyone is, and this we speak in the world of analytics, right? We say that you can't analyze a problem you don't understand.
Yeah.
It's a basic adage that you say. So, and I would call it, you can't even solve a problem you don't understand, right? So many a times, some of the issues we run into as relatively new leaders is we run to fix the problem.
Yeah.
So the need to fix sometimes takes over the need to understand.
Yeah.
And there things start going a little off the rails.
Yeah.
Right? I think what I would recommend is taking this, and I keep saying this over the years that I've been a leader, and I've watched myself make these mistakes too, saying that sometimes I've solved it only to realize that I solved something else.
Yeah.
So this is like trying to change bulbs in your house, and you go and change some bulbs and you're very happy about it, and the bulb that you changed was not the one you wanted to change, right? So, jokes apart, this happens. So I think it's important that people get that. And I think where listening is key. One of the skills that is very important. I actively listen. I have had my own journey in that we sometimes believe we are great listeners till we find out otherwise.
Yeah.
So I think some years ago I found out that might be I wasn't listening as much as I should be.
Yeah.
Right? So some of these skills, I think we just have to, again, paying attention to the environment around you.
Yeah.
Paying attention to what people are telling you. Because feedback is golden. It's really worth a lot. Again, have your own personal value system that allows you to come to terms, and some don't get too worked up about something, but at the same time don't take it lightly either.
True.
So the answer lies in
Balancing.
balancing.
What are some of what I've seen is like there is intrapersonal relationship, or the communication or how you handle that itself. Then there's this whole business acumen, which is what you were referring to. There's a lot to it. There are things that are changing on a daily basis, especially as a leader. It's about country laws are changing, policies are changing, currencies are like, there's a headwind and a tailwind, a lot happening there. And then, of course, there are specific leadership skills like the art of listening, the art of asking questions, measuring outcomes. What do you measure? How do you look at them? The art of really finding the next 3 months forward vision of how this is going to impact you. A whole lot of things over there. And that's just me, just with my little bit of experience. But what are some really impactful traits or qualities that a leader should be honing?
Yeah, this is a personal question because each one has his own style that he or she bring to the thing. Right? I think I can tell you, for me, a few things that I have learned is the importance of persevering.
Mm.
It's many a times, and again, when we get through our initial years, when with our parents, we're in a safe zone,
Yeah.
right? We're with our loved ones, and then suddenly one day we start working.
Yeah.
When you're working in a close, in a loved environment, in a safe environment, things generally go your way,
Yeah.
right? Because the system takes care of it. The ecosystem around you takes care of it. But when you start working, the right thing succeeds. You don't have to succeed.
Yeah.
So the first thing that you learn is just because you didn't like it, didn't make it wrong, right? So you've got to understand saying that I want it doesn't make it succeed. That it is the right thing to do makes it succeed. So first is coming to terms with that, which means there is also a lot of unlearning. I mean, we are great at learning,
Yeah.
but sometimes as leaders, you also need to unlearn before
Yeah.
you need something else. I spent a vast majority of my career growing up in the digital and the data space. And then I reached this cusp some years ago where I made a move to a more general management space, leading a larger organization, right? And running it as the MD of that organization. That wasn't, that also meant that some of the things that I'd learned,
You have to
I would have to unlearn and then redo it in this thing because you need to bring in those tools in your toolbox which make you succeed in the new role, right? Because you're doing a new role. So the tools that you did for doing the earlier role, let's say if I was doing a certain role and I have a toolbox for it, that toolbox won't work for if I change my role.
Yeah.
Right? And I think learning to change that toolbox, which in this case is the skills that you bring in or the experiences that you bring in. Sometimes these get into the way. I think that is very important for a leader. All successful leaders that I've seen or whom I have admired have been great unlearners. They've been able to drop things like, do it for 4 or 5 years and then very quickly learn the ropes of the new trade.
Yeah.
And sometimes I've also seen that some leaders who haven't succeeded necessarily as much as they could have been those who have been a little slow on the adapting and the unlearning part. So I think that's a very important skill. Perseverance, I just spoke about, and empathy.
Mm.
See, end of the day, everything's about people.
Mm.
In the world of technology that
True.
I come from, technology is generally the easier part. But end of the day, you can have the best technology, but if you don't have the right human capital
Yeah.
around it, it's not going to succeed. So empathy and ensuring that you understand people, that you try to bring out the best in them by coaching them, by spending time with them. Sometimes it's as simple as just spending time, engaging them. I think that is key. So I think these are the 2 or 3 tenets that I think I have paid a lot more attention to over the last few years than I've probably done in the past. Right? And I think, each of them has had its own learning, not necessarily. And again, as a leader, believe me, there are a lot of skills out there. You'd also kill yourself trying to be best at everything.
Yeah.
Because end of the day, you have your own personality, you have your own perseverance, the ability to unlearn, which means adapting, or what I call organizational agility, the ability to be agile within an organization. I think that is key. I think it's especially given the VUCA world
Yeah.
that we are a part of.
Yeah.
I think those leadership skills will hold you in good stead.
Was there, this unlearning is it's not easy as easy as it's spoken. It's probably one of the toughest ones because it's about letting go. And we don't do well with letting go as, I think, as people, right? So, are there techniques to that? It's a basic of self-transformation.
Yeah, I think, you should look at most households and the attics that they have.
Okay.
or the storage spaces, right? All of us who grew up in India realize that our attics are probably treasure troves of stuff which probably we never use, but we store, right? And the mind is like that beyond the point. I think from every role that we perform, we learn something.
Yeah.
We store it all. And sometimes some of that learning gets into the way of trying to do because our past experiences have meant that certain things work in a certain way and they don't. 20 years later, if you're trying to bring in that same learning, it might not be as contemporary in today's world as it was. So I think that is key. I think I haven't thought about it consciously, so thank you for bringing it up. But I do think that there might be coaches out there, or there might be techniques out there in the larger world, which are not something that I can think of, or not something that I've actively used, but I've learned to respect the need to develop it a lot.
And is it important in this process to also, first of all, I like the attic analogy. I think it's brilliant. How early did you start this? Because for me, I felt this was something that you need to practice, whether you're a team leader, a manager, to your earlier conversation of you could just be an individual contributor heading in the technology path, more into the depth. But irrespective of where you are, I feel it's very important to practice this because you only hone it and you build on it as you grow, and the challenges are much more different as you climb the echelons. But how early did you start this? And what were your earlier
The
reflections?
first 10 years, I wasn't extremely clear about what I wanted. To be very honest, I took everything that came my way, tried everything out. I never said no to anything. The only rule I had is anything that I did was a little bit better or left me a little bit better in terms of learning and in my career than my previous role, which was probably the only criteria that I had. So I remember joining a particular program many years ago, which rotated me. I came from a data background, but it rotated me through anything and everything. I think. Like, for instance, I did a stint in sales, I did a stint in HR, I did a stint in collections, I did a stint in manufacturing, process engineering, and call centers too. I remember. And I remember that it completely threw me off into a different environment.
Yeah.
And I enjoyed it. Those stints make you realize how little you know and how important your team is. Because end of the day, whether you're selling something or whether you're trying to bring the best talent in, you depend upon a great team to go make it happen.
Yeah.
Right. So that's something that you learned earlier. So I think the first 10 years wasn't very planned out. I took things as they came. But then after a period of time, I just realized that, okay, this is a niche that I've been in. So the initial phase of my career was all very data driven. So I went on to become the CIO of the bank, and I enjoyed it. But then came this opportunity to become more horizontal. I was more of an inch wide and a mile deep, but this was the other way around, vice versa. So I think that, and I'm enjoying it. And you should do things as long as you enjoy it.
What you're also saying is be pretty open to exploring depth as well as breadth roles.
Yes.
Because that is how you sort of groom yourself in the long run.
Absolutely. Be inquisitive, be learn. Like, be curious about a lot of things. Right? I think try to do new things, learn from it. If they don't work, be resilient, move on.
How important is resilience in this process? Because this is not an easy journey. Like, if you take up, and I've done this, when you take up a completely new stream, like, new job profile or a new industry vertical, you're carrying some bit of your legacy of what you've learned. There's a lot of unlearning to do because it's completely different. The skills that are required are different, the demands are different. And you're going with a lot of almost like a clean slate to say, got to learn everything from scratch. And you don't have time. You have to be agile as you're going through this. What's the advice there for someone who's going through this? How early on should they actually go into the breadth versus the depth model?
I think it boils down to individual people. Everybody knows the answers for themselves, so each one has their own style. I don't have an answer to when people should do it, but I have an answer to the fact that that point in time that people feel they need to do it, they should do it. Right? Now, I'm not sure if it's 5, it's 10, it's 15. Individual styles have. I think the bigger worry would be when each one comes to terms with that reality, saying this is what they want to do, them ignoring it. That I would not recommend. Like I would say that, let's say some people might come to terms at about 10 years, saying, wait, this is broadly the chart. And you don't need to have everything sorted out or planned out. I think that's the ability to live with the unknown for a period of time is a very important skill too. I think learning to deal with that ambiguity, both in work life as well as in your professional career, saying that no, I think I'm going to get there. I don't know how I'm going to get there, but I know that eventually, if I do the right things enough times and for a reasonable period of time, the right things will happen. Right?
Yeah.
Just a matter of being very, very mature and very practical about it. And I think that's what people should focus on more. I have seen people who have started things a little too early, and the pitfall there has been that they felt that they decided a bit too early on what they want to do, so it didn't work as well. I've had people try to change a bit too late, and they've come to a conclusion that maybe they could have done more if they changed earlier or come to that conclusion earlier. It's like trying to time the market. I don't think it's an easy thing to do, but everybody has that as that point of inflection on their career graph when they come to a point where they say, you know what, maybe that's what I want. But pay attention to it, and then go make it happen.
There's this whole thing of the legacy of the old you haunting the new you.
Yeah. Unlearning.
Yes. So I want to ask you one thing over here. Was there any part of your journey that really haunted you later and you said, okay, I really need to figure out how to unlearn this bit?
No, not that. But I can imagine that given my data background, sometimes when I am in meetings where there's a lot of data I can see that I have a certain element of data decision making. So I can see some of it comes from the old me, or I can't resist the urge when I see a data engineering discussion to come back and have my point of view added. Most of the engineers probably get annoyed saying that, well, that's fine. You don't need you to tell us that. But yeah, I mean, some of that old me does get into but I try to be aware of it and keep away. But yeah. But end of the day, we're all human beings, right? So we do what we are.
In this process, is brand building also important? Your own personal brand building?
Yeah. I think leadership is also about ensuring that it's not about brand in the sense of just being an individual focused thing, but it's important for yourself to know what you stand for. It's not about branding to the rest of the world. It's about being clear about what you are to yourself.
What are some of the pitfalls you've experienced or the risks that you've seen as you've...
I mean, wrong decisions. Like all leaders, I can't believe leaders have it. Many leaders would have. So I've had decisions which I've made, like as a technologist, I've sometimes betted money on things which I think would have returned. But yeah, my decisions have not turned out as well as I thought they would.
Can you give an example?
Yeah, I mean, some technology decisions. Let's say I decide that, I should probably double down on a particular platform. But then I realize that technology has moved ahead in another platform. Right? So that's a very simple example. So now why does it happen? It doesn't happen. Typically, these things don't happen because of one singular bad decision. That typically means that your understanding of the situation wasn't as good as you thought it was. Your understanding of the ability of the organization to effect change at a certain rate wasn't as good as it was. So there's a learning there, right? So you got to learn from it. So yeah, I mean, I've had my own fair share of things which have gone wrong. But I think the important leadership trait there is to come to terms with it quickly. Saying that, you know what, learn to cut it short when it has to be cut short. So cut your losses and move on. So I think I've typically done, where I've just owned up and said, I tried, I made a mistake. And luckily I've been in an environment all through my career. Luckily I've been lucky to be in environments where whomever my team has said, that's fine. It is who it is. What has happened. As far as we don't repeat it or try your best to avoid repeating it is what I would say. So yeah, I've had, so those are moments which, so your question is probably if I had a magic wand and if I could go back in time and I wish a few things away, yeah, I'll wish away some of the decisions that I made.
And, I play poker. So one of the rules of poker is when you're dealt with bad cards, you fold.
Yeah, you fold.
Because as you go on, your investment is just going to be, it's non-linear in nature. When it comes to risks also, it's the same, right? You then have to have an acute mind for identifying these as this is where I need to fold, or this is so quick decision making requires you to actually take in a lot of these factors. How has that been? Because from your going back to your tenure experience person as Pradeep to today, I'm thinking you have evolved in that space.
I think decision making it's a survival skill. You can't be a leader without being reasonably adequate. It's very easy to make decisions when the exact data behind that decision or the exact emote behind that decision is very clear. But seldom do you have that luxury.
Yeah.
You probably have, it's like the fog of war. You probably have got 60% clear, 40% unclear. You still have to do what when you've got to stand by the decision you made with the logic and the reasoning that you went behind it. For me, the fact that I have a great team helps, because in any organization that I've worked with, I've had people who have looked at me and said, I think it's about time you decide. I think you're being slow, or I know you made a decision. There's a high probability that much not going to come out right. I need people to tell me to my face. Then they come back and tell somebody. So I think that works. Also, when we make this, if you equip your team enough, they'll point out.
Yeah.
Because many a times they're seeing a lot of things which you're not seeing.
Yeah.
So if you've built a good team around you, I think that helps. And I think for all leaders, it's very important.
Yeah. One of the things that I found was also that there's about 40% burnout in the CEO.
Really?
Mm.
Oh, I wasn't aware.
So I was, first of all, astonished with the burnout percentage. But in your own experience, have you experienced any kind of stages, maybe not the full burnout, but to your point, it's a lot of perseverance, it's a lot of responsibilities. You practically have to be on top of everything in the organization. How's the mental health side of it?
That's an interesting stat. I wasn't aware of it, so I learned something. Thank you. I think you should enjoy what you're doing. I think it's a fundamental tenet in any role anything that you do. I mean, you're enjoying doing what you're doing.
Yes.
Everybody here is enjoying what you're doing. I think that's very, very important. So burnout comes when there can be a disconnect between what we think we like and what we think we're doing. So I'm not saying that's the only reason, but it exacerbates the reason. I have personally not felt it might be yet. I think we need to develop very strong coping mechanisms with these things. Ensure that you take care of your health, mental well-being. All these things are very important. Your physical well-being, you get adequate sleep, you get adequate activity, exercise. What you need. I think that is very, very important, right? And that can probably help in these situations. Also, having an active listening set, somebody whom you can, develop that ideas, and it can be somebody outside your team. They might not solve it, but they listen to you.
Yeah.
I think that helps too. I think those kind of things can, but if there is a risk, I think it's good to accept it, saying that sense it before it happens. That is important. And if you feel that you've got to, tweak a few dials in your own personal life, in your own personal routines to go minimize the impact of that, I think one should do. But now that you said 40%, I'll keep that.
And so I think do you want to give a parting advice to anybody who's going through this self-transformation and in this journey of, growing to become a CEO of whether it's their own company or an organization or their own brand? Any parting advice on Pradeep ke char?
I'll call it, and this is not specifically about leadership, but about anything that you do. I keep telling people this, that, and I learned it from one of my early leadership sessions, that be brief, be brilliant, and be done. Be brief, be brilliant, be done. Right? Which means when you go behind something, you should think, but get your act together, go make it happen. Be absolutely brilliant to the extent that you can bring in the brilliance and make it happen and get it done.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And move on. Right?
Yeah.
So I think that it works for me. But again, ensure that for the others, as you said, I think just enjoy what you're doing. If you like it,
Yeah.
But thanks a lot for having me over.
Oh, thank you. Last one. What does Attitude Makeover mean to you?
Oh, I was just reflecting on this whole journey that you had You actually bought out things in me which I hadn't thought about for a long period, right? So thank you. For me, Attitude Makeover, and now I think it makes sense because I was wondering why the podcast is called Attitude Makeover, right? When I was driving in, I was saying, why did South India name it that? I think it makes sense because now I just realized that when it comes to rebooting, it's not so much about what you're going behind, but your mental makeup of how you're going to do it. And if you don't get your mental makeup right, the fact that, you've got to be resilient, perseverant, things might work, be prepared for the long game, it won't work, right? So for me, that is what Attitude Makeover is. I think you got an apt name.
Thank you. Well, Pradeep, thank you so much. Thank you for making time for this lovely conversation. I definitely found it useful, as always. I think every conversation with you has always been a knowledge base to take back home with. So thank you so much.
Being kind is great having you. Thanks a ton, man. Great coming.